Hello and welcome to the IABC Circle of Fellows, episode 120. I'm Brad Whitworth, IABC Fellow, SCMP, sitting in for our regular host, Shel Holtz, who is on holiday. He and his wife, Michelle, are celebrating their 50th anniversary, so we wish them the best, and I'm glad they're there, and I'm glad that I can fill in for him. I want to let you know that I'm not alone. I have my circle with me. It's a pleasure to have with me Priya Bates, Ruthie Ronquillo, and Angela Sinicus. I'm going to let each one of them introduce themselves. We are at a milestone of sorts. I should probably say that at the outset. This is Circle 120, which, if you do 12 a year, that means we have been doing this for 10 years as a group. And so, thanks to all of you for having participated today, but to all the fellows over time who've been able to share their wisdom. And the best part to me is seeing these conversations have a second life. I mean, we have a certain number of people who join us live, but then we also have people who use this as a study aid for doing things like their certification examinations. They'll dial into a topic and study a little bit more and hear some of the collective wisdom that we've been able to gather over the years. So as we start our 11th season of Circle of Fellows, this is way cool. The topic that we're going to be exploring is this whole notion of hybrid communications in the workplace. And it has a couple of different paths we can go with this, and we'll probably touch on all of them. But to talk a little bit about the working from somewhere that is not your normal assigned place that all of us got to experience, by and large, all of us, back during the pandemic in 2020. And the issue often is sort of like, okay, now that we've sort of gotten over that hurdle, perhaps, what is this return to work like? What is being mandated by employers? What is it that employees want? Is there productivity study being done about whether working from a remote spot makes more sense? And I guess at one point somebody said the race to return to home. I didn't know it was a race, so maybe there aren't any winners in this. But let's explore some of this, and I don't know. I guess, what do you think of this whole return to the office path and the pressures slash advantages that it's bringing to workers and employers these days? Anybody want to jump in first?
Well, I think that so I'm Priya Bates, coming in from Toronto, Canada. I have a company called Inner Strength Communication and work with a lot of organizations on internal communication. And the way I come into this conversation is actually from home versus at work. The fact that I've got young people who are entering the workforce and one who is ready to leave the workforce, my husband, and it's been really fascinating to watch the dynamic. So as we go through this conversation on hybrid, I want to lean into generations and their expectations, but also about leaders and workplaces and what is going on, because I'm really insanely curious, and I'm asking lots of questions and hearing some interesting insights.
Maybe let's go to Ritzy, and why don't you introduce yourself and give your general perspective on where this thing should go and what you're seeing as issues.
Thank you, Brad. Hi, Priya. Hi, Angela. I'm Ritzy. I'm from IABC Philippines, and from this part of the world, I'm in Asia. And first, I'll state what I believe in, which is I really, really support hybrid and remote work, so long as it is appropriate to the job and what it should deliver and to the industry it's in. Say also for practical reasons for both employers and employees. I grew up really with a on-site work because my work was really mostly public utility and manufacturing, so you have to be on site. However, the pandemic, as you mentioned, Brad, changed things already. And so um, we have to be practical about what's happening. Plus, we have technology with us already. And actually, here in IABC, way before the pandemic brought on much of the online work, we were all doing our committee work and communication via Zoom. So I believe in always keeping an open mind and being flexible as long as we know what productivity we should deliver. There are issues of trust, and but still, to and I saw this in one of the CEO's podcasts. He mentioned create the impetus to go to work. So there, I'm keeping an open mind.
Love it. And Angela Seneca, good
Hi,
day.
I'm Angela Seneca. I spend most of my time doing communication effectiveness research for clients. My whole background was in organizational communication, but I have this little sort of bent for measuring things. That's what I sort of specialize in. So I think more of what I'm going to be able to talk about today is what I see differently on these communication surveys for people who answer who primarily work fully on site versus fully remote. The hybrids are sort of in between. But I'm really, one of the things that I don't see executives talking about when they insist people return to work is any data, because they would have had data for things like productivity, whether it's billable hours or call center, call volume, data before and after people started working from home. And I never see them bring in those data as part of the conversation of why they want people to come back. And I'm reminded when I used to work at a large consulting firm, and we had just started having casual Fridays during the summertime. And I remember sitting in a leadership meeting, and our regional head said, I'm not sure that this is a good idea to continue in the winter because I don't think people are as productive when they're not dressed formally. And I said, well, gosh, we keep track of billable hours by person, by day, by season of the year. Why don't we take a look at our data and revisit this next week? And lo and behold, Fridays in the summer were the most productive day of the week. And they were much more productive than the previous summer before we had casual Fridays. So we ended up going casual pretty much every day. Data. We've got data. Let's use data in making these decisions.
Yeah, I think that's a great reminder. One of the mottos around my workplace is let data drive decisions. And you can't really improve anything if you don't know what the starting point is. So a great reminder to all of us who tend to focus on, I'll call it, some of the softer aspects of communication. And I guess one of the factors that I see is this. There is that work is a place you go mentality that may have sense in some professions and in some job roles, but not necessarily all of them. But it maybe came from the time when you had to go to the line of production, the making something, or you had to go to the hospital. But you brought up the point that there are so many roles today that don't necessarily have to be done from anywhere, and work is more a thing you do as opposed to a place you go. So maybe we start that. But then I think the flip side of that is there are a lot of CFOs who are looking at, we've got a massive investment in real estate and offices and areas for productivity, and how do I sort of get the best return on an investment of the asset that we've got out there, be it Class A space or you name it. So you got some tension working there. But I may throw this one your way, Priya. I know that the Premier of Ontario announced that all government workers are required to come back 5 days a week starting in 2026. So how is
Yes.
that going down, and what's it mean, and what reactions have there been, and
Um,
any data?
Obviously a lot of noise about it on media about that, and a lot of conversations about not wanting to go full time to work. I think you're absolutely right, Angela. Nobody is talking about data, and nobody is saying here's the proof, here's what's actually happening. And I think the data they are relying on, especially when it comes to the Premier of Ontario, is that you mentioned, Brad, that going to work is part of a bigger system, right? So when people are not going into the downtown core, when they're not going to a physical workplace, the restaurants suffer, the transportation is not making the money and the funds that it normally would. So there's all of these things that working from home has created different systems that when we're thinking from a city or countrywide perspective, we're thinking, how do we save these other places and create the revenue that they were used to, because they have not recovered. So I think that there is some data from a business perspective and traffic perspective that they are taking into consideration. And I think we're starting to see some work on not as much on productivity, but I think there's opportunity. And the one thing I always think about, Brad, when we worked at HP, it was that whole area of management by objective. One of the pieces we're missing and haven't been proactive about is, how do we treat those who are managing people remotely to do it effectively, which is something that was part of our DNA at HP, and I'm sure changed when they tried to bring everybody back into the office, right? Because they kind of went like about turn on that initiative. But I think that there's so much opportunity to ensure that people are managing properly.
Yeah, just yesterday I was speaking with a an HR VP who handles the Asian Asian area, and I was asking him what's it like, and so our conversation continued. Very interesting. He gave me insights, but then it also brought me back to my own experience and also continuous observation here in our country. It really depends on the industry, because there are some industries it's a default you have to go on site, like construction, manufacturing, public utilities. Like I was in a public utility, so there are field people who have to be on the job all the time. So even in our communication, we have to find ways to reach them versus just the email or maybe just the text. So we really have to explore what would be best for our audience. But really, like for plant personnel, for drivers, and we also started talking about things like practicalities of life, like for example socioeconomic class. There are some socioeconomic conditions, like you're just in a rented place, it's cramped, it's in a busy area that's noisy, or you have spotty internet, and so then you cannot really do a fully remote work, or maybe even we've heard it also for some workers, not only because of the type of job they have, but also because of these conditions, these practical conditions that they prefer to go to work. On the other hand, there's also another thing that I don't know about, probably for big cities, that it's the commute, the traffic, the amount of time that you spend commuting. I was speaking with a millennial, and he began to compute for me how much he saved and how much he was able to maximize whatever salary he was getting when he had to remove, say, things like, and then he said, like transportation, I have to provide food, I have to have certain outfits, so I have to go. So he was computing for me the time and motion of all of these. And that's why he said he was also for hybrid. Although I do know of some companies, they allow their shared services like HR, like communication, or maybe IT, to have certain work from home days, and then certain days they still go back to office. Although I do know of some the younger batches, the millennials and Gen Zs, who sometimes ask, is that work before when they apply, is that work fully remote, hybrid, or is it on site? And sometimes they do not proceed with their application if it's on site. So again, it's different strokes for different folks in different industries, but very many nuances that we have to look into as communicators, and even especially if you're running a business.
To build on what Priya was talking about, that managers need to manage differently and be prepared to do that. Interesting, some of the data show from my different surveys that when people are rating senior leadership communications, they rate them higher if they're working remotely than the people who are in the office, which is a little counterintuitive, but it's interesting. One of my clients had gone on Workplace before COVID, and we had done just a workplace survey in October before COVID. So we had some baseline data on how many people were using it and if it was too much or too little volume. And then we, of course, got COVID and they relied on Workplace far more. But luckily for them, their people had already been trained on how to use it. They weren't like scrambling to start using something like Workplace. And when we did a survey near the end of 2020, one of the questions we pointedly asked was, has communication from senior leaders in the last 12 months gotten better, worse, or stayed the same? And the got better were just huge numbers. So senior leaders are really trained to do that. And I'm also seeing that supervisors in a lot of these organizations are really stepping up to the plate. One of the questions I like to ask on surveys is if there are certain topics that you've been expecting managers to talk about with their employees. We ask everyone, has your manager discussed any of these three topics with you, or which of these three? And then when we ask questions of only managers, we ask them, which of these topics have you shared with your team members? And it's very interesting that the hybrid and remote workers have much higher percentages saying that their managers have discussed those topics than people in the office. Now, one thing I have to say, people who are having to work in the office might have jobs that are tied to a place that doesn't necessarily have online access. So these would be managers who are primarily doing face-to-face communication, perhaps exclusively. But still, it's interesting that those people who work remotely are actually being better informed about these topics. Being remote is not a handicap.
I would also add, I keep thinking about healthcare. And, there are some jobs like the phlebotomist where you probably need to be in a lab where there is somebody who has all the equipment and necessary.
Yes.
And I sort of bring that up with also a little bit of a regret. We didn't make the announcement, but there was supposed to be a fourth panelist, Andrea Greenhouse, who was going to join us, but she is at the hospital with her mom who took the fall. So we sort of wish her mom the very, very best on a speedy recovery. We will miss her. And I know that she really wanted to be involved with this conversation because many of her clients are also facing this. And one of the topics that she made sure that I would mention was that there are articles on IABC's website that specifically deal with this very, very topic about hybrid. And I think we're sort of exploring it from the two aspects too. One is the workplace dynamic that we've all described, where you've got some people who need to be, some people who don't. What do you do? What's the infrastructure? What's sort of the cultural thing? But we haven't really even begun to talk about how do you as a communications person deal with these dispersed audience, now geographically dispersed, not only to mention diverse. So Priya, maybe you brought up this topic of generational differences. So maybe you could start there and start to talk a little about how do we communicate with people who, it never really was one size fits all, but we're now seeing that even more so in spades.
And it's really about, starting with the research, right? Every organization is different. As Ritzy mentioned, depending if you're in manufacturing, there are some people who aren't able to work remotely. So when we go in and do audits, just like Angela does as well, we ask people, what their preferences are. We try to understand where they work and how they work and where do they get the information that they need. And then what we see from a generational perspective is kind of different expectations depending on the tools that they're using. How much information. A lot of people, most of those folks don't need to read a novel from you. So it's like, how do you create, I always say, the conversation versus the campaign, but it starts with the strategy. It starts with the research. And then what are we trying to accomplish? What is the business problem we're trying to solve? And who are your stakeholder audiences? It's all those basic foundational steps from a communication perspective that you need to understand. Because I don't know about you, Angela, it's amazing to me when I go into an organization and the first thing I ask is, do you have like a channel matrix and a stakeholder map? And you laughed. I saw the giggle, Angela, and there's nothing. So some of these basics, forget when you start doing a project where you need to fine tune that more, but there is in a general sense of who are your personas, what do they want to receive, where do
Yeah.
we meet them, because what we want to do is meet them where they are, wherever that is.
Yeah, I find that the people who are working remotely tend to take more responsibility upon themselves to stay informed, whereas people who are working in the company premises are kind of expecting to be fed like little birds in a nest. And it's
Yeah.
interesting that this is not only true now, but the very first survey I ever did was long before email and the internet, when I worked at the Chicago Tribune Company. And we had two remote offices. So people worked in offices, but even though most of our people worked in Chicago, we had a New York office for advertising and for reporters, and in Washington, D.C., obviously for reporters. And even then, I broke them out as different locations. And I found that those people there were actually better informed about the key company topics than the people in headquarters. And they tended to feel that they were getting the right amount of information because they were taking it upon themselves to make sure they got the right amount of information. So that seems to be holding true even when remote is physically remote versus remote from home versus the corporate office.
Love the idea of the data. And I guess the other one that's sort of an interesting one that were talking a little bit about is the manager's role in all of this stuff has changed. And there, I mean, I think the other thing I've heard is that we've always had remote. It's just sort of what flavor. Your sales force, if they're doing their job, they're probably not sitting in an office, they're out with customers. And we sort of manage that. Does it require a different sort of communication from managers to be able to lead a remote workforce? And increasingly, is there, now that hybrid is out of the bag, is there any way to stuff it all back in the bag? Are we going to always have somebody on the team who, because of the skill set, because of family conditions, because of whatever, isn't in the same place with all the other coworkers? A lot of weird things to unpack here. Anybody want to jump in and sort of like, yeah, what do we need to do with managers to make sure that they know how to manage this and communicate with a hybrid workforce?
There was this podcast by McKinsey, and among the questions asked was, so what do your employees think versus your employers? And the president of the one who did it was the president of Microsoft Asia, and mentioned that, he said productivity needs to be redefined and measured more accurately. I think this will be something that Angela will really, really be excellent in, and of course Priya and all her thoughtful ideas. So he said that there, because his findings were that employees' views do not are not congruent with or do not equate to that of the employers. So he said 4 out of 5 employees are more say they are more productive at home, while 2/3 of employers say productivity has been negatively impacted because of this work from home or hybrid way of working. He posed the question that, is it probably because they just are so used to micromanaging or seeing the actual people there, or coming from that mindset that if you're not at your desk, you're not working there. So he some still have that sort of a mindset. So it just, I found that very interesting, because then managers have to adjust their style. They have to adjust their style and trust their team more, that when they're out there where they can't be seen, they're busy producing something of note, and that by the time it's due, it will be given in its best form and at the best time ever, and that he's still able to put things together. So I think it's also a challenge to managers to understand the humanity in each one, and that everyone has his own conditions in his own respective houses. Some people say I'm more productive at home because I don't have to commute. And like in some places where there is bad traffic during rush hour, for some that's a plus. But others say I need to talk with my coworkers. I can't just work on my own. I'm so disconnected. I don't feel the culture. I don't feel the engagement, nor do I feel the guidance from my manager. So again, back to um, create that impetus to go to work thing. So even I also noticed that even in terms of office space, so then the office conditions. So I know of some agencies, big agencies, who decided to downsize during pandemic and never went back to their huge offices. They downsized and even just chose smaller rental places, so it will impact on their finances. They don't have to pay so much in a choice area with huge space. And on the other hand, conversely, there are companies that rent out office space, so they want you to go back to work. So there, that's the balancing act.
Coincidentally, I was just talking yesterday with Jonathan Hawkins, who is a son of our IBC stalwart Ian Hawkins. If you guys remember Ian, and Ian set me up with Jonathan. He's a data scientist and he tries to connect different inputs to actual behaviors of employees and customers. So we were chatting about this whole thing about hybrid and remote working. And he said one of the things that they see is that the employees who work hybrid or fully remote tend to be more disengaged from the company, partly because they're not having this constant interaction, but partly because managers aren't providing one of the things that people really need to feel that they want to stay at a company. And that's that their managers have empathy. And it's hard to have empathy if you're only interacting with your employees in group Zoom calls. Because when you're in the office, it's more likely you run into your employees one-on-one, have casual conversations. So I think one of the key things for managers to be sure they're doing is continuing to have those one-on-one conversations with their remote and hybrid employees so that they really know what the issues are for their employees and can demonstrate that kind of empathy that people feel they need from their supervisors.
And I go back to those HP days, Brad, right? My manager, I was working in Toronto, Canada. My manager was either in Chicago or California. My teams were all over North America, and it was that management by objective. We talked earlier about how do you measure success? Well, having those conversations about what success looks like. Your conversation, Angela, about billable hours, having a way to measure that somebody is delivering on their objectives. And productivity, I think productivity is an interesting word because some people think productivity is getting your objectives delivered. Other people think productivity is busy work. You're just doing
Yeah.
stuff, right? So I always enjoyed the management by objective, but then that was supplemented very, very proactively by HP. And this is like late 90s, early 2000s, right? So this was a long time ago before COVID and pandemics. But it was supplemented by people connecting personally at least once a year. And you cannot downplay that personal connection, because I used to remember coming together with my North American or global teams, and all of a sudden that personal relationship that was built turned that team on fire because it was different once we got together online again because of that relationship. And I think that's what young people and people who are fully remote are kind of missing, because it's like we're going fully remote, but you never see your team, or you've never actually have that personal relationship, which means you've got limited amount of time and you usually talk shop. You very rarely ask the questions about how are things going at home. You don't get the water cooler conversation. You don't get sit down at lunchtime, right? And that's what it's the relationship building that creates culture that goes beyond. So what we're going to be missing, or the fear is, without that, you don't have the commitment and loyalty. So those young people are moving. They don't feel when something else comes up, If they're really good at what they do and they don't have that regular relationship that lasts beyond the transaction, it's going to be really easy to say yes to that next role.
Yeah.
And don't you think, though, that I mean, I remember having our IABC friend Carol Kinsey Goman talk to us a little about the loyal employee today is someone who is ready to go but willing to stay, which I love that definition. And
Mm,
I have got marketable skills. I could be doing this for somebody else. They'll probably find at some point that the grass isn't necessarily greener at the other spot. But I think it's a new thing, and we're talking about also how can you are there effective tools, techniques for building the culture? It's sort of that metadata around the communications and the job specific stuff um, with this hybrid workforce, where you might have some people here, some people there, totally hybrid, or the other one I think is going to be the real challenge to managers is you've got 80% of your team there physically with you, and then the few that are not there, and how do you make sure that they're as included as the ones that you can have the casual conversations at lunch or bumping into and grabbing a cup of coffee. So um, I guess I see along a spectrum a whole set of challenges that vary depending upon the mix. And I don't think my thought is we're never going to get back to the one size fits all. Here are the rules. Everybody has to do this the same way.
One of the things I think about is Achievers has done some interesting research, and what they talk about is the employee life cycle and what you do during that life cycle. And one size doesn't fit all in terms of how you deliver, but when you think about how you welcome employees, how you recognize employees, how you manage performance development, how you manage the fact that they're getting promotion, and then thinking about what happens during big life moments. It's how you act that actually creates
mm,
culture and the conversations you have through those moments.
Wasn't there a company that said that if you don't come back to work, you have no chance of promotion? I forget who that was, but that was pretty
Yes.
dramatic. Like, yeah, you can stay and work at home, but just don't expect to move forward or have a pay increase.
Yeah.
Wow.
oh,
Yes.
whoa.
Loyalty goes out the
Well,
window there.
yeah, I still believe in combining. I mean, well, going Zoom or online is really a channel, but spot on, Priya, spot on, Angela, that it's really a one-on-one thing. You really have to give value to each employee, and whether you're doing it Zoom or whether you're doing it email or in person, um, it's still good to do check-ins one-on-one. And these conversations, well, for the moment, if you can't see each other in person, then at least do it online or at least do Zooms. But I've also experienced and I've seen it with teams that they may be apart for the rest of for the most part of the year, but as Priya mentioned, there's a time when you have to be in person. You go there, see each other, and because you've been in touch all this time, it's like when you see each other, it's like meeting a pen pal that you haven't met at all, and then it's a good moment when you are able to talk about things in person, and then you carry that wonderful moment with you back to wherever remotely you are. But really, it's a one-on-one, especially if you're going to discuss something very sensitive. It's still the same coaching and counseling, regular check-in, getting to know your team members really. And I that's so human of us, and that's what we should always do, to get to know the other person, whether he's your boss or he's your team member. There's always the human touch, and I think that's why technology will speed things up, but it's still all up to us people to make things happen.
I'm reminded a little bit that at one point, all of us have been at this long enough. There was like the manager, the immediate manager is an important communications channel. And I said at the time, we probably didn't do enough to let them know that that was part of their responsibility. We probably didn't train them on how to do things right. We didn't give them information to be able to share until we started doing things like meetings in a box or the shrink wrapped, go and tell your people this stuff. And as soon as we started doing some of that mass communications on something that can only be done face to face, one to one, and I keep saying that the new role of a manager of a team is communicating with his or her team in a way that is back to what you were talking about, Ritzy. It's sort of the more human side. It's not necessarily to tell anybody; it's to have the conversation with someone that
Mm,
answers questions, interprets some of the trends, and puts things into perspective for one of the individuals on the team. And that conversation may be different for each member depending upon their job responsibilities,
yes.
some of that generational aspect, and certainly. But are any of you seeing the how to teach managers how to manage in this new environment, and any best practices that you're hearing about from that sort of like the it's a new world that we're working in, and here's the tool set that you need. Here are the skills that you need. Is anybody doing it right?
I'm getting called in a lot more for manager training right now, which has been really terrific. Usually, customers and like clients that I have done audits for in the past, and now they're saying, "Here's the next step, and we want to train our managers." And usually, that is driven by we've got a big change coming up. That the last one didn't work so well, and employees weren't informed. So now we need to engage managers, or let's take a look at safety and how do we ensure that managers are managing safety conversations well, or let's actually talk about the whole area of calling in versus calling out. So there, I've seen a bit of a shift here in North America where all of a sudden there is an attention being paid to managers, whether it's in a face-to-face environment or remotely. That we're seeing that kind of pick up.
One of the things we did with one of my clients is we did an assessment of people's communication skills on, I don't know, like 25 or 30 different skills. And managers self evaluated on those skills. And then the people who reported directly to them evaluated them on those same skills. So we were able to show them gaps of where they thought they were good at something, but they're actually not, or where they were not confident about some skills, but were actually seen as pretty good skills. But we took it one step further when we gave managers their reports on how they stacked up, how their employees rated them, and then how that compared with the company averages. We had one extra column on this report. And that was, what can you do to get a better score? And for each different skill, we provided them links for a short article they could read, a short video they could watch, and an example of an exercise of something they could actually start implementing at work to try to strengthen that particular communication muscle. So I think that was a really useful thing because they just didn't have the resources. It's a global company to bring all managers in for all that training for all those different skills. So it was really self-training just based on the skills that each individual really needed help with.
Yeah, and sometimes that self-awareness is the most important ingredient to be able to want to make that improvement too. Ritzy, you were about to say,
Um, yeah, I just wanted to share also that in our part of the world, I'm in Asia. Our cultures here are very inclusive. So we have very extended families. We have plenty of extended friendships, and so it's like a natural that we will really seek out that human connection. So it was also noted in that same podcast of McKinsey that because of this inclusive culture that this region has, employers need to create a workspace that employees have to feel connected. So it's a natural. So what I'm saying is it's a natural in this part, and it's like innate or a default in the culture to seek out other people. So again, going back to, it's still a one-on-one thing that managers have to do. I think it's also important that we have to change our style, that you don't micromanage. You have to trust. You have to trust your guys and trust the people you work with. And I'm hearing also that as mentioned earlier by both Priya and Angela, is that stakeholder mapping, stakeholder segmentation, and prioritization, and then linking it up, matching it with the appropriate messaging or approach. I keep hearing that again and again in our training programs. They ask, so how do I do that? And these are very qualified professionals. They have great credentials, but now they're seeking the human touch and they really want to know about this. So I guess it's really, again, I go back again to really keep an open mind and go back to the humanity in each one, using the speed and agility of the platforms we have today. But people are now more and more appreciating that we have to define our audience, and it's not just, and I keep finding myself saying this in training programs, it's not just the best way to say things, but what does your audience really need and what are they like, and are you connecting? So I think it's becoming more and more um, obvious to us now, especially we're not always together. Sometimes when we're always together, we kind of take each other for granted, and as Angela said, sometimes you just wait for things to be fed to you, the information, whereas if you're out there you seek it because you don't have it, so you feel that you want that connection there.
Yeah, one of the things that I'm seeing that's interesting is that I think that, yes, managers are really key, but I think that the corporate communications that we create and manage are even more important to those remote employees than the ones that are in the office. Not only are they more interested in getting them, they consume more of that information. They tend to read more articles in the newsletter. They tend to read
Mm,
deeper into the articles in the newsletter. They use the internet more heavily. They use the external website for a company much more heavily than people who are in the office. But what was really interesting, I like to ask outcome questions on my surveys. So, for example, to what extent does the internet or the employee publication achieve certain outcomes, like helping you feel that you understand the strategy better, or that you feel more connected to the company, or better able to talk about the company with people outside of the company. So really connecting the communications that we're sending them with those desirable outcomes. And far and away, the people who work remotely are saying that they play a much more important role for them in all of those types of outcomes. So we need to be aware that we are even more important to the people that we don't see than the people we might be seeing in the office.
yeah.
One more example of one size does not fit all. And what's interesting to me is technology has sort of become both the forcing factor for changing things. It brings certain advantages because clearly the four of us can't get in a room every single month if we wanted to easily or within budget. So it creates some new relationships, but also destroys some of the old ones and some of the valuable ones. I got a comment from one of our viewers. Victor Morales said, one-to-ones, that weekly meeting with managers and teams are becoming increasingly rare. Luckily, my manager does that, and it helps with my engagement. But leading employees from different situations is hard for some managers too. So, there are pluses and minuses, and I think we are hitting upon this. We need to make sure that we do the right things for these. I guess the other one is, are you seeing any sort of emerging trends or innovations that you see growing and helping people both on the receiving end and the sending end with this hybrid workforce?
We're still in early days of adopting the technology platforms that are abundant and available for us. It amazes me that even something simple as running metrics for the emails you send out and readership stats, like there it's people have not invested. The tools are there, from fancy mobile solutions to places to build community, to simply like stepping into the market to understand who's opening and reading your emails and acting on them, right? Like we don't a lot of communication professionals and the team and the organizations are not investing as quickly in some of those technologies as I think are possible. And without the data and without the measurement, it's hard to make really good decisions on what's working and what isn't.
just one little caveat. This is kind of an interesting blip. One of the things that happens, especially with salespeople, they rely more on their personal devices, their phones or their iPads, and a lot of remote people as well. But there is a real downside to pushing people to use mobile devices if they have a big screen option. And that is that when, even though we're sending the same volume of information, articles of the same length, emails of the same length, people who are primarily accessing company information through their phones are far more likely to say they're overwhelmed with the volume of
Mm.
communication and that everything is too long. So it's just simply the experience of having that communication on a smaller screen that makes them feel that way.
And I would sort of add, because I spent most of my career in tech, I remember a technology that Cisco had. They came up with some of this WebEx telepresence, Zoom, Teams like stuff X number of years ago. But they also had a thing that they called, or the, a telepresence that produced 3D holographic people that you would interact with in real time. No lag, no weird. So instead of this two-dimensional world that we've all become used to, where everything's on a screen and it's sort of like a miniature version of the Brady Bunch or Hollywood Squares or something, where we've all got an assigned little cubicle. This would project people in a room, and you could interact with them. And I mean, you could put your hand through the holographic projection if you really wanted to. But maybe there, technology can evolve just as some of these skills can evolve, so that it won't be quite the beam me up Scotty aspect of moving people around. But technology may provide some solutions to some of the downsides. But you know, stay tuned to this space. I probably didn't mention it. If you are watching us on YouTube, you can sort of see the ask your questions, share comments. We'd love to invite you to be a part of this. And if you're watching this after the fact, drop us a note sometime. And I know I just want to make the quick announcement. I know, Priya, you got another engagement, so you may be like disappearing from our Hollywood Squares
Correct.
audience here at a certain point. So if nothing else, I will sort of do two things. One is thank you and Angie and Ritzy for their participation, and also give a little bit of a plug now instead of waiting till the end for the what's coming up. Coming in October, on 23rd, which is a Thursday, Circle 121, as we get into our 11 squared, that's 121 years. It's going to be evolving roles and strategic goals. So this could be a play on what it is that we've been talking about, which is, yeah, you can set the strategy. What are the different roles? Shell Holtz will be back as moderator, and his quadrant, it will be filled by Lori Dawkins, Mike Klein, Amanda Hamilton Atwell, and Martha Bujusti, who will all be here to talk about that one. So if you want to mark the date, and please tune in for that one. Let's dive back in though and talk a little bit more about this. We sort of hit upon this, and we've been bouncing around. Let me say I'm a manager and I've got remote workers, and how do I decide who gets a promotion and who doesn't? Do you use the same criteria? How, what sort of like if you're, out of sight, out of mind kind of thing? Let's explore put yourself in the manager's shoes, and how would you manage a group of remote workers and colleagues?
Everybody's
I
quiet.
used to be with a sorry, I used to be with a multinational, and we had national. Um, well, it was part of a global group, and we had our country targets, as well as we had country operations in different parts of the nation. So um, we had different people who were like with a dotted line reporting to us at headquarters. And so it really was very important that one at the very start of say the annual thing, so the start of the year, it was very clear what was expected of each one, and recognizing what each person can do in their respectives, because they were in different regions within the country. So we had to like I had to understand what was their particular circumstance, and then it had to be I had the job, it would be to connect that now to the corporate level, whatever would be the corporate thrusts, bring it down to that level, and then bring it down to every person. And we would have check in calls. So we would go on Zoom. Oh no, we used Teams at that time. And we would go through things we had to do. So it really means that you pre-plan everything well enough, and then you have to understand each one. So I would sometimes spend time talking with them on my phone, or sometimes we'd have a phone call or have it on Teams, because I really had to understand what was going on, and each one had different concerns, and yet we were all working for the same company. So we really had to keep in touch. And uh, and as I mentioned earlier, the tool of having connectivities from whatever part of the of the country we were in was a big step in making sure we got together, even virtually. But every so often, like every at least twice a year, we had to see each other in person, uh, especially at the start of the year for group conference, then for program planning, and then we just had regular check-ins. And whenever we would go to their work site, we would meet them and check things out again. So it really calls for a lot of check-in. They really have to feel your presence, whether in person or they know that if they're in trouble or they need something, you're just a call away, and that you'll drop it, drop whatever you're doing, and give them time. So again, it goes back to the human side. And I guess it's that personal relationship that's very important. Our CEO had very direct and long time relationship with customers.
Oh,
Losing it there.
yeah.
That's why uh, we had very good sales. We had great market share. We had great share prices, because he made it a point that it was one on one. Each one had his own concern. So it's same thing down the line, cascaded his leadership style down the line. And we were always told, we had even performance evaluations on how often we met our team. But even
Hmm.
without that, our culture is very inclusive. So we naturally gravitate to being in touch with people. I
Uh,
think that's a given.
that's a
And
great way to do things. Pia, before you dash, do you have
yeah, I
how do
was
you
going to say
handle
before I
people?
dash, I'll have a
Oh,
last
there goes that.
last little thing. I think about managing my own virtual team of consultants around the world on specific projects, and I think about who would I hire again. Right. So when you're a consultant, yeah, their performance review is literally you've worked with me on a project, you delivered brilliantly, and when the next project comes back, I'm going to invite you back. But think about it from an organizational perspective. It really is not just about what people are delivering, the outputs, but the outcomes and the connection to organizational results. And I think that's the opportunity when we actually define what that looks like from an individual, and they're delivering not just the stuff, the goods, they're actually connected to the business so that you understand their impact. That's where the magic is. And that's where you can make decisions on who does get promoted, who stands out, because we know what we're measuring and we know how it's connected to the business. It's that thread that takes you from the values to the mission to the vision to the strategy to the actual outputs, outcomes, and results at the end of the day. And if the better we can do of tying an employee to understand how they impact the organization, and the better we understand that as managers, the better decisions we can make. And with that, I hate to say goodbye to everyone. It was a great conversation, but I will leave you at this point.
We will see you again soon, and we'll put in a plug for Toronto IBC World Conference because
Absolutely.
I
See
know
you
you're
here.
going to have a heavy hand in making that happen for us. So
Well,
thank
I will
you.
be enjoying it with
Yeah,
everybody else.
yeah. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you. And Angie, let's turn the ball over to you.
Yeah, I think it's not just managers staying in touch with their employees to see who should be promoted. It's also those managers which managers should be being promoted or even being demoted from being managers. And I remember a few years ago that IBM has a very interesting metric that helps them decide if managers are successful in their roles or not. IBM very heavily relies on employees using their internal social media for getting done, Teams work, conversations and all that. So they have some kind of algorithm in place that can track if particular teams have suddenly had a drop in their engagement in their internal social media, because what they have found is that when that happens, that team probably has a new boss and that boss is not working out very well. So the HR actually intervenes when that happens, and they start having interviews with that manager and their employees to decide if that person just needs some training and coaching, or if that person is just in the wrong kind of role and needs to be moved to some other non-managerial role. But I just thought that was very interesting as an ongoing metric that's not a survey of employee engagement levels, is the level of engagement in internal social media.
Yeah. Well, one of the themes that I've heard throughout our conversation is this whole human, and it reminds a little bit that like one of the first assignments that I had when I went to work at Hewlett Packard, HP, that both Priya and I worked at, was helping craft a speech that Bill Hewlett delivered at Notre Dame University. And it was called, the title of it was The Human Side of Management. And a lot of it was about, yeah, there's technology all around us, but, as it's like a commencement address, as you go out into the workplace and you go to, all this different, it's like to remember that it's people that make up organizations, and it's people that accomplish these goals, and never let the technology get in the way. And it was an organization. I think one of the other things that made HP so successful back in the heyday of the organization was the concept of management by wandering around. And then it was within a physical environment. You did this little stroll all the time to talk to people, not only about work-related issues, but also about what was going on in their lives. You needed to know people as individuals and as part of a larger corporate family, if you will, and it's sometimes a little bit of a stretch to be able to call it that. But managers were coached on how to do that. And the other part was, don't go and just talk to the people that you talk to all the time, not only your direct reports. Talk to others, build that network, and the ones who did that well really would shoot up to the top in terms of organization and promotion, and the ones who didn't do so well didn't. And to your point, Angie, it's like maybe you want to take that individual contributor kind of a role as opposed to a people leading kind of role. So even back then, we were seeing some of this, and now it's like, okay, how do we keep the concepts alive and practice it in this new world where we're not talking about the plant. We now can talk about sort of the globe, and we can connect in different ways, and you have to do electronic wandering around in addition to the one that you might do face-to-face in person where you can reach out and touch people. So it's sort of a fascinating time for communications people to explore it, because I think it also brings together, and we've talked about this as a group, is that it's the technology, it's the people, it's the metrics, it's the personal touch, it's the where people go for information, it's the pushing stuff versus pulling stuff, and it's all those things that we as communications professionals have to do. And what I guess I would sort of, if I can offer a wrap-up comment and let you guys jump on it, is we're responsible in some part for creating the environment in which all of this stuff takes place. That we have to look at all these different aspects and come back with this is what's right for this group at this time, given culture, given the hybrid workforce, given the technology that we've got. So a last set of remarks from you guys as we wrap up this hour of talking about the challenges, communication challenges in hybrid workforces and workplaces.
Maybe not so much a challenge, but just there is at least one upside. One of the other things I see for the people who are working remotely is that they tend to say that information they receive is more consistent and they tend to hear information from the company first rather than from rumors or from employees or outside the company. So there are some upsides to having a more controlled communication environment where they're not just randomly talking to employees and hearing rumors.
And let's see.
Well, it's always a good combination to team up data and research and your real time, real live touch points with the people. We continue to adapt, and so many new stuff is going to come along, new work habits, new work policies. But I think we must continue to what they call in the quality movement, go to the Gemba. Gemba is your shop floor. Get primary data, talk with the people, and be authentic. Use appropriate channels, and for me, regardless of what else we have to adapt to, the human spirit will always be ascendant.
That's a great send off. And I did hear the grandfather clock telling us it is the
That's
top of the hour there. So a
it
late night
is.
for you, Ritzy. So thank you for joining us. Angela, thank you. Belated thanks again to Priya Bates for being a part of it. And the two unspoken parts of the crowd, Anna Marie Willie, who pulls us all together, coaches us, gets us
Yes.
lined up to be able to do this. So a huge shout out to, I'll call her our executive producer, and Shell Holtz, our moderator, who should be in this seat and is cruising in the Mediterranean. He was even involved by making sure that the technology was working just as perfectly as possible. So thank all of you on the team, and
Thank
thanks
you,
to you
Brad,
guys
for
for
jumping in and
watching.
doing such
Yeah.
a good job.
Yeah, well, it's always fun to do this, and I look forward to pairing up with you guys and getting Shell back. So, thank you. Have a wonderful day,
Thank
all, and we
you.
will see you again soon. From Circle of Fellows, bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.